The narrative introduces us to Ruth within an Israelite family context that, due to famine in their land, sought refuge in Moab. In this foreign environment, the sons of Elimelech and Naomi established marital ties with Moabite women, and Ruth was joined in marriage to one of them. We can imagine that despite the cultural and religious differences between Israelites and Moabites, bonds of affection and companionship developed. This union, although seemingly distant from the center of God's chosen people's history, does not escape his gaze. God, in his sovereignty, can use every relationship and every circumstance, even those that appear to deviate from the expected course, to weave his greater plan. Here, we reflect on how often our relationships and opportunities arise in places, and at times we do not plan. Could it be that God is planting seeds in seemingly strange lands, preparing the ground for a future blossoming that we will only understand later? Our lives are intertwined in mysterious ways, and each person who crosses our path may have a role, however small it may seem, in the tapestry of our destiny, guided by the invisible hand of God. The sudden and painful loss of her husband plunged Ruth into deep mourning, a common human experience that transcends all cultures and eras. Beyond personal grief, widowhood in an ancient society brought significant social and economic vulnerability, especially for a foreign woman in Moab. For Naomi, the loss of her sons represented the breaking of family ties and the extinction of her lineage in that land. Amidst this darkness, where the future seemed uncertain and tears were the only constant, we might wonder where God was. Reflection leads us to believe that even in the valley of the shadow of death, the divine presence does not depart. God does not necessarily shield us from pain, but he can be our refuge and strength, offering a love that comforts and a peace that surpasses understanding. Just as clay is shaped in the fire, perhaps pain is a process of refinement, preparing us for a greater purpose that we cannot yet see. Faith teaches us that even in the longest nights, the hope of a new dawn remains. Faced with the prospect of returning to her homeland and starting her life anew in a familiar environment, Ruth made a surprising and radical choice to remain by the side of her mother-in-law, Naomi. Her famous declaration transcends the simple duty of a daughter-in-law. It reveals a bond of deep love, solidarity, and an identification with Naomi's destiny. Ruth chose an uncertain future alongside a woman embittered by loss in a foreign land where she had no roots or security. This decision confronts us with the depth of true love, the kind that does not seek convenience or personal gain, but rather gives itself in support and companionship during the most difficult times. In our lives, we are constantly challenged to exercise this loyalty, whether in our family relationships, friendships, or in the community. Do our choices reflect a sacrificial love that aligns with God's unconditional love for us? Ruth's decision, seemingly an act of self-denial, planted the seeds for a future she could never have imagined, showing how faithfulness and love can be powerful instruments in God's hands to accomplish his purposes. Following Ruth's touching display of loyalty, the two widows undertook the journey to Bethlehem. Imagine the arrival scene: two dusty and weary women entering the gates of a city that had once been Naomi's home, but now saw her return in a state of notable vulnerability, accompanied by a foreigner. The contrast between Naomi's departure years before with her husband and sons and her solitary return with a Moabite daughter-in-law certainly generated a buzz and curious glances among the inhabitants of Bethlehem. This was the beginning of a new chapter, marked by uncertainty, but also by the promise of divine providence in a land that was the cradle of their faith. The arrival in Bethlehem was not just a physical return, but a spiritual and social fresh start, where Naomi's roots could, in some way, offer sustenance for both of them. Upon their arrival in Bethlehem, the immediate need for sustenance became a priority. Following a custom of the time, which allowed the poor to glean in the fields after the harvest, Ruth humbly asked Naomi for permission to go to the fields, to seek food. This attitude demonstrates her willingness to work hard and her concern for providing for herself and her mother-in-law. The choice of the field where Ruth went to glean was not random in God's eyes. Divine providence guided her to the lands of Boaz, a wealthy and influential man, who was also a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. This chance encounter, seemingly a simple act of seeking food, was in fact a crucial step in the unfolding of God's plan for Ruth's life and for the lineage of Israel. Divine providence manifested clearly when Ruth found herself working in the very field of Boaz. This encounter was not a mere coincidence. Boaz, a man of noble and pious character, soon noticed the presence of the foreign woman working in his fields. His attention was drawn not only to Ruth's diligence, but perhaps also to her vulnerable situation and her loyalty to Naomi, who was certainly already known in the community. The way Boaz acts from this moment onward reveals the kindness and generosity that were characteristic of a God-fearing man, following the principles of Mosaic law that instructed care for foreigners, orphans, and widows. This initial meeting between Ruth and Boaz was the catalyst for a series of events that would transform both of their lives and have a lasting impact on the history of Israel. Boaz's kindness towards Ruth manifested in concrete and surprising ways. He not only allowed her to glean freely in his field, but instructed his servants to intentionally drop grain so that she would have more food to gather. Furthermore, he protected her, ordering no one to bother her and offering her water to drink during the hard work under the sun. This preferential treatment did not go unnoticed by Ruth, who, being a foreigner and accustomed to marginalization, must have felt deeply grateful and encouraged by such kindness. Boaz's action reflects the heart of God, who extends his grace and care beyond borders and demonstrates practical love for those who are considered the least favored. In a world where indifference and exploitation are common, Boaz's attitude shines like a beacon of hope and compassion. At the end of a hard day's work, Boaz invited Ruth to share a meal with his workers. This gesture of inclusion was unusual for the time and demonstrated an even greater level of respect and consideration for her. Sitting at the table with those who worked for him elevated Ruth's status from a simple foreign gleaner to someone who was recognized and welcomed within the field community. This moment of communion and sharing points to the welcoming heart of God, who breaks down social barriers and invites everyone to participate at his table. The shared meal was not just about physical sustenance, but also about building bonds and offering dignity to someone who might feel invisible and marginalized. Through the simple act of sharing bread, Boaz was demonstrating the practical love and justice that were pillars of the faith he professed. Upon returning home at the end of the day, Ruth shared with Naomi everything that had happened, including Boaz's extraordinary kindness. Naomi's reaction was insightful and full of hope. She recognized the hand of God working in that situation, realizing that Boaz was a close relative, a potential redeemer for the family. Naomi's guidance to Ruth from this moment onward demonstrates her wisdom and her faith in divine providence. She encouraged Ruth to continue working in Boaz's field, recognizing the safety and opportunity that this connection could bring. Ruth's experience in Boaz's field was not just about obtaining food, but about being inserted into a web of relationships and possibilities that God was carefully weaving to restore the lives of both women. Naomi's wisdom became even more evident when she shared with Ruth the customs of their culture related to family redemption. She explained that Boaz was a close relative who had the responsibility and the possibility of redeeming the family property, and consequently providing a future for Ruth. perpetuating the name of her deceased husband. Naomi's suggestion for Ruth to approach Boaz at the threshing floor during the night, following a specific cultural protocol, demonstrates her hope that Boaz would act in their favor. This strategy, although it might seem risky and unusual by modern standards, was an accepted practice at the time to present a formal request for redemption. Naomi's trust in the customs and, more importantly, in Boaz's character was a reflection of her faith in God guiding events. Following Naomi's instructions, Ruth went to Boaz's threshing floor at night, a place where he and his workers were cleaning and storing the grain after the harvest. The scene at the threshing floor, under the moonlight, and perhaps some bonfires, was a work environment, transforming into a place of significant encounter. Ruth's approach to Boaz, following the custom of lying down at his feet, was a gesture of humility and a formal request for him to exercise his right of redemption. This act required courage from Ruth, as she was a foreign woman approaching an influential man in a predominantly male environment and at an unusual hour. Her action demonstrates her faith and her willingness to follow Naomi's guidance, trusting that God was working through that situation. Boaz's reaction upon being awakened by Ruth demonstrates his honorable character and his reverence for customs. Instead of rebuking her or taking advantage of the situation, he acknowledged the significance of her request and praised her loyalty in seeking redemption within her deceased husband's family, rather than seeking a younger or wealthier man. His response was marked by integrity and a willingness to fulfill his role as a potential redeemer. However, he also informed Ruth that there was a closer relative who had the prior right of redemption. Boaz's promise to resolve the matter legally the next day reveals his justice and his commitment to following the correct procedures, demonstrating that he was a man who feared God and respected the law. The next morning, Boaz acted with diligence and integrity to resolve the matter of redemption. He went to the city gate, the meeting place for legal and community affairs, and summoned the closest relative who had the prior right of redemption. The scene at the city gate was a crucial moment, where decisions were made publicly and before witnesses. Boaz presented Naomi's situation and the possibility of redeeming Elimelech's property, which would also entail marrying Ruth to continue. The name of the deceased. The way Boaz conducted this negotiation demonstrates his respect for the law and customs, seeking a just and transparent solution for all involved. His concern was not only to fulfill the law, but also to ensure the well-being of Naomi and Ruth. The dialogue between Boaz and the closest relative reveals the implications of the redemption. The relative was willing to redeem the property, but hesitated to marry Ruth to continue the name of the deceased, possibly due to financial reasons or not wanting to compromise his own inheritance. The law of redemption had a noble purpose of protecting families and ensuring the continuity of lineages, but it involved significant responsibilities. The closest relative's refusal paved the way for Boaz, once again demonstrating his kindness and sense of responsibility to offer to redeem Ruth and the property. His willingness to take on this obligation, even knowing it would involve future costs and responsibilities, is a demonstration of his altruistic character and his consideration for the well-being of Naomi and Ruth. With the closest relative's refusal, Boaz publicly declared his intention to redeem Ruth and Elimelech's property, thus fulfilling his role as a true goal redeemer. His decision was witnessed by the elders and the entire community present at the city gate, conferring legitimacy and legality to the act. This moment sealed Ruth's fate and opened a new chapter in her life. Boaz's willingness to marry a foreigner and to continue the name of a deceased man who was not his direct relative demonstrates a love and loyalty that go beyond legal obligations. His action is a reflection of God's redeeming love, which does not hesitate to approach and rescue those in need, even if they are from outside the original community. After the redemption agreement was publicly sealed, the path was open for the marriage between Boaz and Ruth. Their union was not just an act of fulfilling the law, but also an encounter of two souls who found love and companionship amidst challenging circumstances. The marriage of Boaz and Ruth represents the union of an upright man and a loyal woman, an alliance built on respect, kindness, and now love. This union, which in human eyes might have seemed unlikely due to their different origins and the tragedies they had both faced, was part of God's plan to restore Naomi's life and to insert Ruth into the lineage of the Messiah. Their marriage was a testament that divine love can blossom in any context and bring hope where there was once only loss. The consummation of Boaz and Ruth's marriage brought great joy and new hope to Naomi. That home, which had once been marked by loss and sadness, was now filled with the promise of new life. Ruth's presence as the wife of a good and providing man meant security and stability for Naomi in her old age. This was the care of God manifesting tangibly in the lives of these women who had faced so many hardships. Ruth's marriage was not just a happy ending to her own story, but also a point of restoration for her mother-in-law's life, showing how bonds of love and loyalty can be powerful instruments in God's hands to bring healing and renewal. The final blessing of Ruth's story manifests with the birth of her son, Obed. This event not only gave Ruth the joy of motherhood and Boaz an heir, but also brought profound restoration to Naomi's life. The women of Bethlehem celebrated the birth of Naomi's grandson, seeing in him a sign that her lineage had not been extinguished and that God had not forgotten her. Obed became the link that connected Ruth, the loyal foreigner, to the lineage of David, the great king of Israel, and ultimately to Jesus Christ. The birth of Obed is a powerful reminder of how God can use the most unlikely circumstances and the least expected people to fulfill his redemptive purposes in history. Ruth's journey, from loss and uncertainty to love and motherhood, culminates in her integration into the divine plan of salvation. The news of Obed's birth spread quickly through Bethlehem, and the joy was contagious. For Naomi, holding her grandson in her arms was like receiving back a piece of her past and the promise of a blessed future. The women of the city gathered to congratulate Naomi, recognizing Ruth's loyalty and Boaz's kindness as instruments of divine grace in the restoration of that family. That moment of community celebration highlights the importance of social bonds and mutual support in times of joy and overcoming. The story of Ruth and Naomi had touched the heart of Bethlehem, becoming a living testament to redemption and the hope that can arise even after the greatest losses. The genealogy that concludes the book of Ruth connects Obed to Jesse, the father of King David. This connection is crucial as it establishes the lineage of Ruth, the loyal foreigner, within the history of Israel's salvation. The inclusion of a Moabite woman in the ancestry of Israel's greatest king is a testament to God's inclusive grace, which is not limited by ethnic or social boundaries. The story of Ruth, therefore, is not just an account of family love and loyalty, but also an integral part of God's redemptive plan, culminating centuries later in the birth of Jesus Christ, a descendant of David. This genealogical perspective elevates Ruth's story to an even greater significance, showing how the choices of individuals can fit into God's divine purpose for human history. Ruth's story resonates even today as a powerful reminder of God's unconditional love, which manifests through loyalty, kindness, and providence. Every twist and turn in her journey, from loss to restoration, reveals the hand of God working behind the scenes, guiding events towards a greater purpose. Ruth's choices, marked by faith and devotion, inspire us to trust God even in the midst of difficulties and to demonstrate love and loyalty in our relationships. Her story teaches us that God can use people from all backgrounds and in all circumstances to accomplish His plans. Just as Ruth found a place in the heart of Israel and in the lineage of the Messiah, we too can find our purpose and our place in God's plan, trusting in His grace and following His ways. As we reflect on Ruth's journey, we are confronted with the importance of the choices we make in crucial moments. The decision to remain with Naomi, even in the face of uncertainty and the apparent lack of a future, was an act of faith that opened unexpected doors. Her willingness to work humbly to provide sustenance, her obedience to Naomi's counsel, and her courage in seeking redemption from Boaz demonstrate an attitude of trust in God and proactivity amidst difficulties. Each step of Ruth was guided by a loyal heart and a resilient faith, qualities that we are also called to cultivate in our own lives. Her story encourages us to persevere, to seek God in all circumstances, and to trust that He can transform our valleys of shadow into paths of hope and blessing. Boaz's kindness is a remarkable example of how divine principles can be lived out in practice. His generosity towards a needy foreigner, his integrity in following the customs of redemption, and his respect for the law demonstrate a character shaped by faith. Boaz not only fulfilled his legal obligations, but went above and beyond, showing genuine compassion and care. His story challenges us to examine our own attitudes towards others, especially those who are marginalized or in need. We are called to be instruments of God's kindness in our world, reaching out, offering support, and seeking justice in all our interactions. Boaz's example shows us that true faith manifests in concrete actions of love and service. Ultimately, Ruth's story is a powerful demonstration of divine providence. From the chance encounter in Boaz's field to the birth of Obed, every event seems orchestrated by an invisible hand guiding the steps of those who trusted in God. Even amidst loss and uncertainty, there was a plan unfolding, a plan that would culminate in the coming of the Messiah. Ruth's story encourages us to recognize God's presence and action in our own lives, even when we do not understand the path ahead. We are invited to trust that, just as He cared for Ruth and Naomi, He is also working on our behalf, weaving a greater purpose through every circumstance we face. As we contemplate the tapestry of Ruth's life, we realize that the moments of greatest vulnerability often precede the greatest blessings. The loss of her husband and the decision to leave her homeland placed her in a position of dependence and uncertainty. However, it was in this fragility that her faith and loyalty could shine intensely, attracting the attention of Boaz and paving the way for her redemption and integration into the community of Israel. This dynamic teaches us that we should not despair in times of difficulty, but rather seek God and remain faithful to the principles He teaches us. Trials can be the fertile ground where character is forged and where divine opportunities can blossom in ways we never imagined. Ruth's story is a testament that resilience and trust in God can transform our greatest weakness into our greatest strength. The lineage of Ruth, a foreigner, culminating in the birth of David and subsequently in Jesus, is a powerful illustration of God's universal redemptive plan. He is not limited by geographical, ethnic, or social boundaries, but His love and grace extend to all those who seek Him with a sincere heart. The inclusion of Ruth in the genealogy of Jesus is a reminder that, in God's eyes, what matters is not our origin, but our faith and our willingness to follow His ways. Her story encourages us to break down the barriers that separate us and to recognize the dignity and value of every human being as part of God's creation. God's redemptive love transcends all divisions and invites us to be part of His family, just as Ruth was welcomed into the heart of Israel. The beauty of Ruth's story lies in its simplicity and depth. It shows us that love and loyalty are timeless values that transcend cultures and eras. Ruth's decision to leave her land and her gods to follow Naomi and the God of Israel is an example of genuine faith and unwavering commitment. Her journey inspires us to question our own loyalties and to consider the depth of the bonds that unite us to others and to God. In a world often marked by individualism and the pursuit of personal gain, Ruth's story reminds us of the importance of putting the needs of others above our own and of trusting in divine providence to guide our steps. May we learn from the humility, diligence, and faith of this extraordinary woman, allowing her story to resonate in our hearts and motivate us to live with more love and devotion. Ruth's story is a beacon of hope for all of us. It teaches us that even in the darkest moments and the most desperate situations, God has a plan and can transform our pain into joy, our loss into blessing. Just as Ruth, who was a foreigner without prospects, found a place of honor in the history of God's people, so too can we find our purpose and our identity in Christ. Her story encourages us not to define ourselves by our present circumstances or our past, but to look to the future with faith and trust in the one who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. May Ruth's journey inspire us to keep hope alive in our hearts, knowing that God's redeeming love is able to reach and transform us, regardless of where we come from or what we have faced. May Ruth's story be a constant source of inspiration and encouragement on your journey of faith. May you find in her loyalty a model for your relationships, in her diligence a guide for your work, and in her faith a foundation for your trust in God. May Boaz's kindness challenge you to be generous and compassionate to those around you, and may the divine providence that guided Ruth's steps remind you that God is always present, working on your behalf, even when you cannot see it. May the beauty of the redemption that manifests in Ruth's life be a certainty in your heart, knowing that in Christ there is always a new beginning and a living hope. Lord God, we thank you for stories like Ruth's, which teach us about love, loyalty, faith, and your constant providence. We ask that you help us apply the lessons of this story in our lives, to be loyal in our relationships, diligent in our work, and confident in your plan for us. May we recognize your hand in every detail of our journey and live according to your redeeming love. Amen. If this story has blessed you, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Give it a like to help us reach more people. Share this video with your friends and family, and don't forget to comment below your reflections on Ruth's story and watch other videos on our channel. May God bless you.